Welcome, Chandrika, to the interview, the third interview of cultural awareness and storytelling. I'm very, very happy that you're in. You are a Hindu priestess and a storyteller from Wales, and I'm very curious and excited to talk with you today about all the stories. And with us is also Victoria Behem, and she's just taking care of the background and of the chat, that everybody feels cozy and well in the audience. We also have a little live audience here, and I welcome every one of you to be in the live audience, and I also welcome everybody listening to this interview when it will be published. The first few questions are about storytelling from you, Chandrika, just your personal storytelling life and questions about your personal storytelling. And the next few questions are about storytelling in your cultural heritage or in your homeland. So it's also very interesting to hear something about the difference. And the third bunch of questions are about when stories travel around the world, the stories from your heritage. So, and the other thing is that it's not only my questions I'm asking, but we have community calls every 3 months, and then we gather the questions, and sometimes they come in via email after the community calls. So I'm not only taking my own questions, but I'm taking the questions of the community. So if you want to attend to a community call also and make this project even more, like Victoria said, that it's in the soil and it can be and grow like a plant, you can come into the community calls, and we will also always share the next interview partners and ask for your questions to be asked in the interview. So now I'm happy to begin with the interview and with the first questions. And the first one is very open. It is a question, if you would like to share where you are and feel at home and how you came to be a storyteller.
So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about my background. My father and mother were born in India, in a state known as Gujarat in northwest India. And at that stage, India was a British colony. And in the early part of the 20th century, Britain encouraged Asian people to leave India and go to East Africa. The initially they basically brought in Indians from various parts of India as indentured laborers who are almost like slaves. And later on, and that was to build the railways, because Uganda, out of the 3 East African countries, was a rich country in resources. So the British wanted a railway to run from Uganda all the way to the coast, which is Mombasa, because remember, in the early part of the century, in that century, there was a lot of travel by ships. So they wanted a railway track. Later on, in the early part of the 20th century, they invited Asian people to move, Indian people to move to Uganda to start like an infrastructure, so to speak. So the Asian people, Indian people, became a go-between the indigenous African population and the colonial rulers. So my father emigrated. My father was an orphan at a very young age. His parents had died, and he had a brother who was working in Uganda, who wrote to him and said, you're 18 now, you can come. I would like you to come here and join me. My father was training to be a priest, a Hindu priest. And so in 1935, my father emigrated to Uganda. He worked there for 10 years, and then he came back to India, married my mother, and then my mother also emigrated. So we are 6 children, but all of us were born in Uganda to Indian parents, Gujarati parents. Our mother tongue was Gujarati. We started with Gujarati as a language. Before we went to school, we were told to write and read in Gujarati so that English can start in the schools. And so really, we were Indian people living in Africa, but living an Indian life and following an Indian culture. And in 1972, the dictator in India who had taken over the country and gave the Indian people 3 months' notice to leave the country. So remember, there were some Indians who had become Ugandan citizens, but a lot of Indians had still their British passports. And initially, the call was to say, if you have British passport, it is Britain's. You are Britain, you should go to Britain and live there or go back to India, but we don't want you here in Africa. So anyway, long story short, we came here in 1972 with nothing. So because he took all our possessions and all the money and everything that my parents had accumulated over the years. And we came here in North Wales, stayed in a resettlement camp, which was an abandoned army barracks, until early part of 1973. And then we were given a small council house in South Wales. And that's where I went to school. And I was 14. So I have been here for over 50 years, 51 years actually, yeah. 13th of October, by the way, we left Uganda. So what do I follow? So in reality, I practice as a child Indian culture, the Indian music, Indian dancing. My parents liked some of the literature, Gujarati literature. So, we were familiar with that. And then, of course, I come to a country where we are isolated. So there were not many or hardly any Indian people in this village in South Wales. And so I just, at the age of 14, I just thought I'd lost everything. And, no longer could I share music with anyone. I couldn't, do my dances because I used to love dancing and singing and writing in Gujarati. So, but couldn't share any of that. So in reality, it just felt like starting from nothing, starting from fresh. And it took me a long time. I think that migration is really interesting in the sense that some people are not affected by it and other people are affected really very strongly by it. And in my family, I would say I was affected really badly by it. And I just, felt like as soon as I grow up, I have to go somewhere and find home again. And, the whole concept of home for me was lost. So it was a big loss. And so I wandered around like someone who doesn't have a home until I was 45, 46. And then I had, at that stage, that was the time I had become very depressed. So I suffered from really bad depression because of all the stress over the years. And it was a good opportunity to stop work and basically just find myself. And at that stage, I thought, I had been to India by now. I'd also been back to Africa, except that when I went to Africa, I felt I no longer fit in. It had changed. I went to India thinking I speak 2 Indian languages. I know everything about the culture. I will go in and I'll be like fit in, slot in.
Mm.
I went to India and yes, I spoke the languages. The smells were different. The fauna and flora was different. I was not accustomed to people staring at me, even though I plaited my hair long and wore a bindi and a sari. They knew I was not from India. And I recognized the shortfalls that I would find difficult to settle in India. And so at the age of 45, I thought Wales is as close as I can go, which is going to be home. So I left my job, came to Wales, and I didn't really have a job at that stage. So I used to walk around different parts of Wales, where in Cardiff. And I would, if I saw the hill in the background, I would look at it and tell myself, this is the hill I saw when I was a child. Mm. And if I saw the sunset, I would say, this is the sunset I saw when I stood there as a child in my parents' house on the veranda, and the hill was on the left-hand side, and that's where the sun set. So I tried to impose, this country onto my world. So that's who I am. So I am Indian, born in Africa, and I've lived in Wales majority of my life.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for sharing this life story. That really touches me. We were talking about, when we had the talk before, we were talking about the difference between belonging and what was it? Belonging and being at home somewhere?
Feeling at home.
Yeah, feeling at home. No, it was belonging to and having a homeland or something, that there's a differentiation.
Yeah.
And I'm still thinking about this fact.
Don't worry, I don't think I will ever stop thinking about it, because it's so much in my psyche and it is so big in my life that yeah, and it's a really interesting concept. Recently, I was invited to give an interview for another project, which is based in Wales, and we did it so that my little niece, who is born in this country, so it was, and she's nearly 30, she's 29, right? So it's a conversation between me and her, and I asked her as to what is her sense. Does she count herself as Welsh? Does she count herself as Indian? What does she? And she said, it's a bit complicated, because it is complicated, because you follow multiple cultures within yourself. And I think that's when I thought, well, actually, am I like everyone, majority of people around me, which I'm not? But do I belong here? Is it my home? And yes, I do belong here. And it is my home here. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to the next part of the questions. Because the second part of the question was, how did you came to be a storyteller?
So storytelling was a big part of my life in Uganda. My father was a priest, so my father used to travel a lot, and leaving like the 6 children with my mom. We lived in a very small village with very little light pollution, warm, 18 degrees in the evening at night. So my mother would lock all the front doors and everything, and we would have a courtyard in the back of the house. So we would all take our little blankets and pillows, and on a platform we would make ourselves a little story space, and the children would lie there and look at that dark African sky with stars, which was so big because there was no light pollution, and my mother would tell us stories. And my mother was a very good storyteller, and she told us stories that she had learned from her mother. And there were, most of the stories, the protagonist was a woman. So I gather that those stories were folk stories which women had created to entertain other women. So the women would sit down and tell each other. So her mother had told them when they were children, in the early 1920s and 1910s, and then she told us the stories in 1960s. On top of that, my father being a priest, so we can go into it deeper later, but if I can say that stories play a big, big role in the practicing of Hinduism. So my father as a priest would tell certain stories which are told to the congregation. There are some stories which we call katha, and katha are told, let's say, over a period of 3 days or over a period of 11 days. And they are told with singing, music, and narrated. So my father had a very good singing voice. So my father would sing these stories and tell them. So I had watched my father do that, but I'd also seen my mother, because we have certain, I can call it festivals, which the men are at work. So I think majority of women in those days were at home. And what they would do is, it would be a certain religious festival. They would all gather around on the veranda of our house. My mother would have made a goddess out of clay, a little idol out of clay with cowrie shell eyes and little teeth, and put flower in her hair and dress her up in a red sari. And they would have the goddess there, and all the women of the town would come at various times to worship the goddess. And they would also plant, by the way, wheat, and worship the growing wheat, because it's all about harvest and growth, and a lot of harvest and planting and all that, right? So the women would then gather together, sing songs, and tell each other stories. But the stories would be all about that particular goddess at that time. So I had seen storytelling from lying there under the stars, to my mother telling stories at various religious festivals to other women, to my father reciting a tale to a huge group of people who had gathered. So
that really matches. I don't know if you want to say much about it, but it matches to the next question on the list, because the next question is a community question. And I asked the same question also, the Wangari and Tears Crow. So it's very obvious, very interesting. What are the different answers to the questions? And that question is, what is storytelling to you? Is it something holy, foundation of your identity, culture? Or is storytelling fun, healing? What is your individual point of view? What is storytelling for you?
So before I answer that, let me just say that I had no idea growing up here in Wales that storytelling was an art form. I'm a dentist by profession. So, I was busy with my work in that area. And I had done, because I always like arty things. So I went to do a music workshop, a singing workshop. And there I met Kath Little. And Wangari mentioned Kath Little in her interview. So Kath Little is probably a person everyone will mention because she's such a nice person. And she was there. She has a good singing voice. And she told me she's a storyteller. And they meet every month. And she gave me details of where they meet. It took another 1 or 2 years before I went to the storytelling. And as soon as I went there and they were all going round telling stories, it was so easy for me to just tell a story because I had heard so many stories in my childhood that it was just natural for me to just tell a story, which I did. And I continued then until 2020 with the pandemic, when there was a lockdown. And I worked mainly in dentistry. I worked with disabled people. So I didn't work in practice. I worked only with the people, neurodivergent, all kinds of disabilities, physical, mental, dementia, all kinds of things where communication is really important. And that's when I decided that I can no longer do this because I have to lift people, from the wheelchair onto the chair. And then, of course, I have to bend because they can't lie flat. And I thought, gosh, I'm like 60 now, right? I don't want to become so disabled myself that I can't live my life. So I need to retire now and live outside dentistry. And at that stage, be on the board of Storytelling Festival, advertise for new voices. So I applied for it and I had mentoring and I transitioned to become a professional storyteller. So that's what happened. What is storytelling to me? Storytelling to me is each story you hear or tell opens up something within yourself, within your heart. And our communion with the universe is what storytelling is to me. So I don't look at the storytelling as, oh, I better learn these 5 stories. I'm going to go and tell them because that's how I earn my little bit of whatever. I'm not in that sort of place. I'm in a place where storytelling is passing the wisdom on, because I had learned about Hinduism from my parents via stories, as most Hindu children here, because Hinduism is passed on via stories. And those stories are very fantastic, and you find them funny and you find them good, and it's got a bit of wisdom in it. And it's only as it says in the Bible, I just remember my headmaster at school in Wales saying, when I was a child, I thought like a child, but when I grew up. So that's what Hinduism is, that you initially absorb it as a child and then it matures and then the wisdom comes. So in this country, I feel like I need to pass on that wisdom to the other generation now. Storytelling is, I think stories are really important, you know. Stories are everything from, you know, Wangari was also talking about it to say that we, you know, we tell each other stories all the time. I went to the shop and the shop was closed and this happened. It's got a beginning, it's got a middle bit, it's got an end bit, right? So our life as humans are stories, you know. And but I think there is something very good about humans, and there is also something which is not so good about humans. And we need to keep on passing the stories, the messages, that we need to nurture our good self and calm down our self, which is not so good. You know, which wolf do you nurture? The one you feed is the one which will grow. So it is about that, yeah, at the end.
I'm going to skip a bit and look up at the question. Can you share some thoughts about the differences and similarities of Hindu tales and Indian folk tales?
So India is a subcontinent. It's a massive country. We call it a country, but it's like a continent. And officially, it has 22 languages. Officially, right? There are other languages which are there, but which are not considered as official languages. It has many states and many communities who all have their own language, their own culture, and their own songs. And it's in various parts, you know, north is so different than south. And hence the seasons vary also. So what you have is, you know, some places they will have 2 planting seasons because you have the rice planting and wheat planting. There are 2 different types, and you know, food production is always associated with folk tales and storytelling. So, and India is no different. But this would mean that each little state has its own folk tales and its own stories, which, like my mother's stories, which were about women's stories, they would have their own stories, which are reflecting on their own culture. And sometimes some of those folk tales will have, I'm going to go a step back before and just explain something else, which is in India. India has 2 languages, which are ancient languages, Sanskrit and Tamil. So there are 2 ancient languages. And then, of course, Indo-European languages in the language tree. So majority of Indian languages have derived from Sanskrit, and some of them, Tamil is a language by itself. And so they have their own folk tales, and many of the folk tales may have a Hindu deity in it, but it's not a Hindu tale from the Hindu scriptures. They may have created a tale with saying, and then the goddess came and she did this, that, and the other, and everything was wonderful, but it's a created tale like a folk tale. So they have a lot of, so we have a lot of folk tales depending on the state you live in. And of course, you've got classic tales. So the classic tales are Sanskrit based, the ones at least I had come across, or the ones, and the oldest one is Panchatantra. Panchatantra tales go back to, they say, 200 BC, and they were the ones which were later on translated initially into Persian, and later on into Arabic, and then they also went to Europe. So many of the Panchatantra tales we find in all types of cultures everywhere. We all have Panchatantra tales, right? So they are the older ones. And then of course you've got the Hitopadesh. Hitopadesh are slightly later on, and they are fables. So they are animal fables. And then, you also have the Buddhist tales, which are the Jatak tales. So you've also got the Jatak tales. So these are all classical stories, right? So they are, because they were written down in classical language. So therefore they are classical tales. Sort of folk tales, folklorists. We have had academic folklorists who have started putting the folk tales which they hear from people into books. And I'm only familiar with some of the Gujarati ones because I'm a Gujarati, but I do buy books which are from other parts of India, and because I would like to read them and see how different they are, So the Hindu texts are very different. The Hindu texts are the Mahabharata. No, oldest one is the Ramayana. The oldest one was the Ramayana. Then you've got the Mahabharata, and then you also got many, many other texts which are called Purana. Purana means ancient. And all this literature is known in Hinduism as Smriti. And Smriti means that which is remembered. So remember that anything memory is involved, memory is fallible. Yeah, so they are Smriti text. And you also have the oldest base of Hinduism is based on what is known as Shruti. Shruti means that which is heard. So because the oral tradition was such that the Vedic text are chanted to a meter. So it's like a song. You have to have, and there should be the inflection. Everything has to be absolutely correct, because that's the only way you can transmit it to the next generation. And hence they call them Shruti, the ones which are heard, and they were passed on from one family to their children to another family. So it's the Brahmin families who often it was passed on. So these are the Shrutis which form the foundation of Hinduism.
Wow. Before I get to the next question, we're in the middle of the next section about Hindu stories, but I think I missed one personal thing, how you became to be a Hindu priestess. Maybe you want to share something about that, or about what you're doing, so we can have another deeper understanding of your point of view.
All right, yeah. So when I was little, when I was 7, my father became ill and had a stroke. And that meant that he never got his mobility back totally. He was in a coma for a long time. There were no hospitals. So that's another story. But my brother, who was my older brother, used to go and help my father, because remember, we lived in a country where there is no sort of security blanket, healthcare is paid for, right? You don't have you've got nothing to fall back on, you've got to work. So my brother used to help. And when my brother went to further education, my father needed someone else to hold the plate for him and feel important and all that, right? So I had to push myself beyond my brothers and say, oh, I think I'll do it, right? And of course, my eye was taken a few times. And so that stayed with me. And in those days, even just like all organized religions, women were pushed back. It's the men who were the priests. Although in Hinduism, there is a role for women, which my mother played. So there were certain services she would take and certain things, because my mother had also studied Sanskrit, etc., when she was a child, right? So it was easy for her to do that as well. So when I was sort of, I would say in 2002, a friend of mine came over and asked my father if he would do his marriage, because my father has married his parents, so he wanted the same priest. And my father by this stage was too disabled and said, I just can't do it. And he desperately wanted someone from the same family. So he said, can you do it? And I said, well, I'd have to learn. And the wedding wasn't until the next year. And I think what was important is that he was getting married to an English girl, and he wanted everything explained in English, which is fine. And so it took me a year to learn how to do a Hindu wedding. And I had studied some Sanskrit, etc., in this country. And so anyway, I learned it. And my family wasn't, my father wasn't like, my father didn't say anything, but it was my brother. And he just said, people often undermine women in a public space. They will not feel confident to undermine a male priest, but they will feel confident to undermine a woman priest. And you really shouldn't do it. And but I just wanted to do it. And so I did it. And I wasn't undermined. Lots of young people came and gathered and circled me and said, never seen a woman priest before. It's so nice to see a woman doing it. And I had all the older people who my father had done their weddings came and blessed me and said, we are so glad you're doing this. And so that's how I became a Hindu priest.
Mm. Yeah, that takes me to another question, which also has some answers in it and something you already told. But I also think about our talk we had in Wales about Hinduism as a whole. So maybe this is a nice question. How differs the Hindu culture in Wales, in Uganda, in India? And in India itself, it has more than 10 or more languages, it says the community question. So is the religion also different? What does Hindu religion exactly mean? That's the question.
Well, I think Hindu religion is a little more complex than some of the other religions. And it also doesn't have to be an organized religion, because remember that as a Hindu community, there isn't one head, there isn't a person at the top. It is only the Vedas, which are the basis. And so the Vedas are interpreted via 6 philosophical schools, which we call darshan. You all will be familiar with one of them, which is yoga. It's called yoga darshan. And so not just the physical exercises, but the meditation, the yoga, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra is sort of, it's about you as a whole. So yoga itself is one philosophical system which interprets the Vedas in a particular direction. So you can have Hindus following 6 different philosophical schools. Hinduism is also very open, that you don't have to go to a temple, because all of us have little shrines in our own house, right? You can create a shrine anywhere. You, like my mother's clay goddess, and you would worship her, and then you put her back into clay and she becomes everything, you know? So in reality, do we need permanent structures? And the other thing is that the Hinduism itself, you know, the philosophy that I follow, to me, is the metaphysical, the spiritual side of Hinduism, which is really the whole universe is a temple. You know, you don't have to worship that. Now, I was going to say God, because that supernatural being, we say in English God, but every time you say God, it conjures up an entity which is a male entity. Every time you say God, I think of a male entity. Hinduism, the base is Brahman. Brahman means that which is vast, that which is big. So that means that, and that Brahman has no gender. So Brahman isn't male or female. Brahman only has one aspect to its nature, and that is, we say bliss, but I could say love. So it is that fabric of the universe which keeps everything in harmony, which is healing and loving. And it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, where you were born, what religion you practice, because Hinduism is then pluralistic, because that Brahman is everything and everyone. You are all part of me, and I'm part of you. Doesn't matter what language I speak, what religion you follow, what you feel comfortable with. We are all sort of united. And when I was younger, I used to write poetry, and I used to imagine the Brahman as like a silk fabric. And then we are all there like little waves, little creases. And then when you iron it out, it just becomes that fabric. So that's how I understand Hinduism, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much for giving us all those pictures and ideas, and yeah. I will have a look at the questions. Which question wants to be asked as next question? So I have a question. The first question, community question about storytelling in your cultural heritage would be: is storytelling alive in your practice? I have to ask, like this is not easy to ask, because this is just a question for all the interview partners. So we have to adapt it a little bit. But is storytelling still alive in your culture, it says, in your heritage, in your Hindu practice maybe? Is it being lived? And if so, how do you keep it alive? Yeah, what are the ways in which it is done? That's
okay. So let's again divide it. Storytelling in order to pass the philosophical message by the priest or the kathakar is really active. It is there because people will go there every single day, even in this country, and sit there on the floor for 10 days listening to the stories and the music, etc. So those are the kathas, are the religious stories. Some of the religious stories are adapted to an artistic nature, whether it's dancing, singing, and telling the stories. I mean, we've also had movies, you know, Bollywood movies made of gods and the stories out of Ramayana and everything else. So these are really, I mean, in India, of course, whether you do Bharatnatyam or whether you do Odissi dance, or a lot of classic tales are told via classical music and dance. So, but oral telling, oral storytelling, because, you know, the whole world has changed since I first went to India at the age of 20, and 40 years later, it is just so different. So what you have is, we no longer have, people no longer have the time, and we live in a different type of a country where houses are closed, the front doors are closed and the windows are closed, and we all live in there. And we invite people, and it's those who are invited. We open our doors to when they come in. As a child, every house was an open house. If I fancied watching television, I would walk into the neighbor's house and sit down while they were watching television, and no one would say to me, "What are you doing here?" So when my mother told stories out in the courtyard, the neighbors would also come. They would all come and they would all sit around, and my mother would then tell the stories. I think we've lost that. That doesn't, you know, all the times I've gone to India, I've not seen that at all. And in reality, I think it's a shame that you lose the folk tales and that folk culture, because I went specifically to India in 2020 because my mother had died, and only one person was alive who had listened to my grandmother's stories, which was my aunt. And I went there and stayed with her because I wanted her to repeat those stories to me. But she was too old. She was in her 90s now, and she was saying, "Oh gosh, there's so many stories, you know, and they're all mixed up in my head now." But if I could go back and do one more thing, I wish I had taped my mother telling those stories in this country, and got her to, you know, when my mother was very ill, I did tape her to tell me about her life, and when she married my father, and what it was like as a child and all that. But the stories, I never even thought of the stories, because at that stage, I was not into the storytelling world. So yes, I would say that all the stories are there. Yeah, they're told in India and here.
Okay, I'm going to, I think, is there something yeah, this is a nice question. Is there anything else about the setting for storytelling events in your culture that you want to share? So do you feel something is open to the questionnaires about storytelling in your cultural heritage, or do you feel that we captured this?
I think we've. I will share one more thing, which is one of the stories my father used to tell, which was a religious story, which had to be told over a period of 3 days in a particular lunar month. It has to be told at a particular time. And my father used to sing it and then explain, and sing it and explain. And that story has been, my grandfather, when my father was little, used to recite the same story. So in reality, I have got the written version, which is dating back to 1920 something, and written by one of my uncles. And that is a version which was probably written in the 16th century. So it's a religious story, put down to poetry and music. And it was there was a Gujarati poet by the name of Premanand, and Premanand wrote it, and he was a storyteller. And at that stage, Gujarat was under Islamic rule. It was a Muslim king, and Gujarati language was suppressed. So, and he was furious. So he would write, and he would transmit those stories in Gujarati, and he would sit there to make a point. Now we're talking about 16th century. So in 16th century, as it was around even in Europe, that men wore hats. So, and Indian men wore turbans. So he would take his turban off and put it on the floor. And then he would have his drum, you have a pot and you play the pot with the rings on your fingers. So it's called manbhat. He was a manbhat. So he would play this drum, this pot, and tell the story, sing it. And the point he'd be making was that until I have restored the honor of Gujarati language, I am not going to wear my hat. So, and he would go from village to village telling those stories. So I really love reading that, because what it has is it's got these ancient stories based on Hindu scriptures, which is the Purana, but it has a lot of element of what life was like in the 16th centuries for women particularly. And I find that fascinating. Yeah. That's all. So.
Thank you. So I go on with the next, the last I don't have the English word. It's capture. It's caption.
Capture.
Capture. Chapter. I don't know. So, about when stories travel around the world. So I think this was a very nice. I think she's here. It's Heike who had this question via email, and she asked, to what extent do you make a difference in whom you tell a Hindu story? And how does the story change without losing context?
Well, a Hindu story, if it's a Hindu story from the Hindu texts, should not lose the spiritual meaning. Because if it loses the spiritual meaning, that's the whole essence of that story gone. Folk stories can be changed. In fact, sometimes folk stories are written in a way that we no longer tell those stories. Even us not just me as an Indian Hindu, but as a culture. If there was a story about humiliating a Black man, or there was a story about abusing children or whatever, we would not tell them even if they were written, because it would be not acceptable anymore and culturally. So there are sometimes you will come across folk stories, and I really think that they should not be told then. But I do like telling Hindu stories because I can inspire the women of the next generation, because majority of time they're told by men, because the priests are men, and they have interpreted them in a particular way. So I feel like I need to put it right. Because, and I do feel very strongly that philosophy is on my side. Philosophy is on my side because if you say Brahman has no gender, the soul has no gender, and therefore we are all one. It is only the body which is different. And if that's the case, I need to put it right. So my niece, etc., they love it, and they do tell me, please carry on, because we want to hear more of that. You know.
Thank you. So how do you feel about other people who are not Hindus to telling Hindu stories? If somebody falls in love with the story?
And they should, you had asked me when we were, two things you'd asked me before. One was the use of language, the fact that how you do the pronunciations, because remember, everything's based on Sanskrit. So you need to learn to pronounce things properly. And that's number one. It's like if I was telling a Welsh story, I really would learn the Welsh words correctly and practice it and then tell it, because really the name should not be, you go on other times where you'd say, okay, we can't call you Chandrika, it's too complex, we'll call you Shandi, right? So those times are gone now, right? And we need to learn to pronounce other people's languages, right? So there would be that aspect of it. But the religious aspect, I would feel that the context has to be correct. The philosophy has to be correct. That if the philosophy is not correct, then really it should not be told then. I think it's easy to learn the philosophical concept. I don't think it's that hard, but because, like I would give you an example of Ganesh, right? Because I know that story that you love, right? So, and Ganesh is, you see, these deities are really, really important to us. They are artistic representation of a philosophical concept. And there isn't anywhere in the universe where there is a person or a being sitting there with an elephant head and a body of a human. That is not there. But the concept, the philosophy around Ganesh is important. And so in reality, sometimes when I go to do a service for particularly Maharashtrian people, because they are strong worshippers of Ganesh, and I'm doing the service and I see these tears flowing from the people who are participating because of their faith in that deity. So here we have not particularly aesthetically pleasing image of a deity. We have an elephant head, we have a big belly, he's just sitting there, right? And but Ganesh is a deity who is really, he is the god of wisdom, that the one who gives you clarity and the one who takes away your obstacles by giving you directions. So the stories around Ganesh are, I cannot imagine anyone who is a Hindu would tell a Ganesh story with without the love for Ganesh. So I would, because to me, Ganesh is not an elephant. Okay, yeah, they put the head. It has a meaning. The meaning is he's a god of wisdom. My ancestors would have said, what does wisdom look like if it is personified? And wisdom personified is someone who is wise, hears more than they talk. So he has a little mouth and big ears. Someone who is wise is able to look into all the minutiae, and hence he has the little eyes which you squint. Someone who you are telling all your problems to, which is Ganesh, because he's a problem solver. He keeps everything you tell him into his big belly. It doesn't come to his mouth. He doesn't go and say, oh, by the way, Momo's got this problem, right? And so Ganesh is wisdom personified. That's how we see Ganesh. So we have a lot of respect and love for Ganesh.
I have some questions about Ganesha, but maybe I'm going to keep them for the Q&A. Maybe there's some time there. So we can go on with the interview. But thank you very much for sharing. It's really very nice to have insight with a concrete Ganesha picture.
All right, yeah. Are we frozen? We are.
No, I'm not. I'm thinking which question I should take. I'm sorry. I'm going to cut this out of the video because I really I'm going back and forth. Which one should I? I'm going to just take one.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to take this one. Is there anything that is important to you when stories of your heritage travel to international storytellers? Are there stories? I mean, we're in the middle of this because that's why I'm asking myself if I should ask this question, but it's maybe something occurs. Are there stories that you think should only be told in a setting that is appropriate for them? And I thought about, did you already answer the question, or is there something still?
Well, some of the stories, like I told you, that the story my father told for 3 days running, they're only told in a particular month. At least that's the tradition, that they're told on a particular lunar month. And there are certain stories, when stories are told for passing on the religious wisdom, they are told where you then create an altar and everyone is there sitting, listening to them, but it is almost like you're sitting in a temple. Well, it is a temple. So even if it is a hall or your house, you make it sacred and you say, this is a temple. And then people will come and sit there at a particular time. They will not walk in with their shoes or, that's the way those stories are told. Regarding the religious stories which are told in an artistic context, and Peter Brooks did the Ramayana with I don't know whether anyone had come across him, but he directed sort of a dance and thing which was the Ramayana according to Peter Brooks. So people do it, but as long as they don't get the philosophy wrong. I think it's important to get the philosophy right, So, and I think that a lot of there is an aspect of Hinduism which is based on the philosophy and the religion, but there are lots of things that we do which are based on customs. So I think the customs can change. And my role as a Hindu priest is really constantly reminding people and saying, but that's not part of the religion, that is a custom, and you can change it. You don't have to do it because your grandmother did it that way. So I think does that answer your question? Sort of.
Yeah. It
can be told, but in a way that doesn't destroy the philosophy.
Yeah, so it's about that's all what this is why I'm doing this project, because I felt like we have there are stories where we really have the opportunity to connect with one another and to find out about all this deepness and philosophy that is behind the stories, like feeling the background of the story and feeling that there has to be communication about that and not staying at the surface. So
I just wanted to mention a story. You know, there's another, of course, the Katha Sagara Sarita, right? Sort of, which are the ancient stories. And some of them have the folk tales. And many of you might have come across it. There is a story of Vikram Aditya. Vikram is a king who has to pick up a corpse in the middle of the night, and then the corpse will give Vikram a riddle. And if Vikram knew the answer, he has to tell the truth. And but if he told the truth and he was right, the corpse would go back on the tree, and Vikram would have to go again and pick him up, right? So these are called Vetal and Vikram in Indian languages, and I heard people say the corpse and the king in English. So there is bits in that story which is about religion, tiny bit. But majority of it is folktale. And of course you can tell, yeah, anyone can tell it, you know, it's, yeah. And those stories are told. And the Birbal and Batsa, which is the stories between the king Akbar and his chief advisor Birbal. And Akbar is always getting into trouble, and Birbal has to sort it out. And so these are all the really old Indian folk tales which are told.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, so that I think we're getting to the end. It's not bad, but we're not bad in time. It's quite good. We're doing good with a lot of questions I have on my plate here.
Yeah.
So I think this is the question of Here's Crow. She was asking herself, I think, because it's some there are some equivalents in the both of the interviews from you and Here's Crow. Here's Crow's you couldn't hear it yet because I'm still working on the subtitles.
Okay. Yeah.
So, and she asked if how do you cope with international storytellers that have questions in reference to your language or the background or the deeper understanding of a tale? Like if somebody comes up to you, I understand the question, like if somebody comes up to you and says, I'm really into this story and I want to understand it more deeply. And she asked, are you willing to share in deepness to make the story go on with a deeper understanding? I think that's the question about how do and she asked, how do Hindu tellers deal with that?
I don't often, I mean, I already do that because what I have learned, I'm already passing it on. I'm not a guru or anything like that, but what I've learned about my religion, I am passing it on already. And I'm sharing the depth in this interview, sort of like, it's I think many of the religions have their own depth, and you can't share it you can't pass on that depth in a short space of time, and I think that's how sort of I see it. I think folk tales, etc., are, you can change them and tell them anyway. People do, because they're already, you know, there's so many tales from Panchatantra which are written in English, and they're adapted and they've changed slightly, and that's fine, you know.
Okay, just take the next one. How do you feel about that's also a community question. How do you feel about the Western yoga community taking over parts of your religion and putting them into another cultural context? And how about the word namaste?
And namaste is just a greeting. So namaste is used as a greeting word. Or namaskar, which is not so common, but they are both, nama means to bow, and namaste is I bow to you, right? So namaste is a greeting word, and so that doesn't bother me, and I know it's used. In fact, it's nice that it's used. Yoga, does it bother me? Not really. In many respects, I just think that, but it would be good to include the philosophy and not just practice it like, I'm going to move this arm here and that arm here, and you just do the physical exercises. It is about connection, you know. It is a means of connecting with the universe. Yeah, so it is a philosophical system. It is a means by which you steady your mind, because in reality, a lot of yoga postures are about focusing and steadying your mind so that you can stand on one foot or one toe or whatever. So a lot of exercises are strengthening mentally. You know, because remember, when you are trying to practice yoga, you would have to just focus on your foot, because your mind can't wander around all over the place, because otherwise you'll fall. So it's mindful to an extent, you know. Yoga itself is mindful.
Thank you. Yeah, so I have this one. Do you know anything about research sites, books, or other ways in which we as storytellers can understand more deeply? Would you share something like that? Or do you know valuable hints or links or websites, talks, anything that would you like to share with the community?
So are you talking about sharing Hinduism, or are you talking about sharing Indian stories?
Yeah, that's really funny about the concept of just reading the questions that that are thought to be for everybody, because I'm reading them and it's like, okay,
yeah,
how could you put this question in
I think it's maybe a question that interests Ursula, maybe comes from her, and Ursula wrote both in that chat.
Yeah. So books about, let's say if you're going to start with the classics of storytelling, then I would give you the 3 titles and anyone can read them. I'm sure they're available in German, they're available in all kinds of languages. And actually, that reminds me, that sort of tells me that there is a really strong link between the ancient Hindu culture and Germany, in the sense that Sanskrit is one of the languages which is taught and celebrated in German universities. And I always read that in Indian newspapers, which says, you see what Germany is doing? It's doing all this and we're doing nothing, right? So I read that. So it sort of makes me feel, and it might also be because of the language, because Sanskrit grammar, I think, is structured similar to German grammar. So I think that makes it maybe ancient German philosophers, etc., found that interesting to link to Sanskrit. That's besides the point. But the classics, yes, I can just give you titles and you can look it up and just read the stories, you know, sort of like these are the classic, like Panchatantra, Kathasagar Sarita, Hitopadesh. So these are and they're penguin versions. There's Corpse and the King. There's a penguin version of that, which is Vikram and Vetal. There is also another one, which are 32 Tales of Vikram, which is, you know, it goes like this, that they found an old chair, you know, king's throne. And when the new king tries to sit on it, the throne is decorated with 32 women. So as soon as he tries to sit on it, one woman springs up and said, wait, you can't sit there until you answer. I'm going to tell you who this throne belongs to, and I'm going to tell you a story about him. And if you think you are as good as him, then only you can take a seat. And then she tells him a story. So 32 stories are told in that sort of way. And that's a penguin version as well. You can easily get it. So these are the classics. Ramayana, I'm trying to think, have I read English version? Which will be simple. So Ramayana you can also find, but you need to find a simple version because, you know, it's okay to go to simple version and then you gradually build and rather than actually going straight and jumping down. Because if I now look at Sanskrit, they're written, the Valmiki Ramayana is written in Sanskrit, right? 24,000 verses. So 24,000 verses, a poem, which is the story of Rama and Sita. And if that Ramayana is translated, and in fact, I've just got the copy, and it's like, I've got like 8 books on it, which is translated by a Sanskrit scholar in India to English. And it's actually, even though it's written in English, it's actually tough going, you know, because, you know, nothing is easy in life. You know, unfortunately, nothing worth having is easy in life. So I would recommend that people initially just understand the story and then say, is this correct? And they know the story. And then maybe we could have something where people can send questions to say, well, what about this? And then I can answer back to my knowledge as to what. Like I've been asked by Settle Stories, which is in Yorkshire based, and she wants me to tell the whole Ramayana in 15 minutes. Yeah. 24,000 shloks in 15 minutes for children. So when I sort of brought up Sita, the Sita, Rama's wife, and she said, the lady who's invited me said to me that, oh, I really like that, you know, you're sort of presenting Sita as an empowered woman. I'd always represent them as empowered women. I would never translate it, ever. I really look at the versions translated as they've all been translated by men, and therefore it's their version. So yes, and those things, yeah.
So we're heading off to the last question of the interview, and then we will have a little break. And that's also a community question. What's your favorite story? I mean, I think that's really a hard question, because I would think for myself, oh my God, my favorite. What's your favorite story? Why is it your favorite story? Why are you called to share it with other people? And would you like to share it with a short story, if it's short enough, with us here?
My favorite story, I would say, is Savitri. Savitri is her name. And Savitri was also a princess, and far too intelligent, far too bright, so no one would ask for her hand in marriage, and as is the case in life. And Savitri falls in love with a man. Her father says, choose a man that you like. So she falls in love with a man. She wants to marry him, until the sage, the seer, says that he's only got 1 year of life left. He will be dying exactly a year after the marriage. So the father says, look, choose someone else. You don't want to be a widow at such a young age. And she said, no, I will marry him. And she marries him. And when the last day comes, the god of death, Yama, comes over to take his soul. And he takes the soul. But Savitri is able to chase Yama and keep up with him. And Yama then, every time he sees what she does, he says, okay, I'm going to give you one wish. And he offers her 3 wishes, one after the other. And the final wish he gives her, she says, I want to be a mother of Satyavan, which is the man, his child. And Yama is in a dilemma, because once you say I will give you anything you wish for, you can't take it back. And so she trapped him. And then he sort of says, okay, take him back, right? So she gives the soul of Satyavan, and Satyavan comes alive again. So my mother used to tell us that story as a child. And when I was a child, the Hindu women also have a day attributed to Savitri, and they would worship the banyan tree, because she was sitting under the banyan tree with her husband when Yama took the soul. So the banyan tree is sacred. And what they do is they have cotton thread, and they worship the banyan tree by putting the thread around it 108 times. So I had seen that as a child, and I always sort of think they're celebrating the banyan tree but the banyan tree was a witness where Savitri was so bright and clever that she was even able to outwit the god of death. So it's one of my favorite stories.
Thank you for sharing. Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Chandrika and Momo, also for conducting the interview.
Welcome back.
If you have questions or comments or... Yes, Bernhard.
Already. It was not long ago when a colleague of mine worked out a story of the Mahabharata, and it was contained of these brothers who were the oldest brother gambled away their sovereignty for 12 years, and she made a story out of a little scene for only 10-15 minutes with how are they called? Yeah, in the woods where there are ghost-like creatures who, yes, and she did. Do you think some of these kind of stories are fit to tell because they are like a part of the religion? At least it seemed to me like it's a part of the religion.
I give you yeah, it's a good question, and I remember sort of someone commenting. I was at another place and it was about the Mahabharata, and another storyteller, English guy, sort of said, oh yeah, Mahabharata, the king was a gambler and he gambled all the fortune away, etc. And I thought, right, okay. Because you see, this is when you tell a story literally, in the sense that it doesn't have any philosophical meaning. You read it the way that they played dice and he lost, and hence Yudhishthir is the king, and Yudhishthir is also known as Dharma Raja. Dharma is righteousness, someone who knows from right from wrong, and Yudhishthir is considered as Dharma Raja. And so he always made the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that if you just tell the story the way it is, because you can just say, oh, it's a gambler or whatever, that's not the right context. And I think if you say it like, if the story is told like that, then they haven't understood the Mahabharata, right? They haven't understood the meaning. All they're doing is just repeating the scenes, And this happens often, the misconceptions, because when we were in Morocco, something happened. I don't know what the conversation or the context was, but we were talking about demons or something like that, something demonic.
Mm-hmm.
And one nice storyteller said to me, oh, like Kali. We don't look at Kali as a demonic goddess. Kali is a mother, to us. She is the goddess. She is the mother. She is depicted in a horrific way. So if you look at it with her tongue sticking out, and I already said earlier on about Ganesh, that Ganesh is wisdom personified. Kali is the warrior woman personified. Yeah? And it's a particular concept where Kali looks the way she looks because the demon who she wants to kill is every drop of blood that drops creates a new demon. And this blood drops, as they try to kill him, the drop of blood becomes a new demon. So she says, right, as a capable goddess, she grows her tongue really long and licks all the blood, and one goes before it sprouts into another demon. Yeah? Who are the demons? We need to ask. Who are the demons? They are within us. They are us. We are partly God and partly demonic. I said that in a gentler way earlier on to say we are good and not so good. But let me sort of say, and there are some people who are more demonic than others. And the idea in Hinduism is that you've got to polish yourself from inside.
Yeah, she in this story, it was not so emphasized the gambling loss, but more the union between the young brother or the youngest brother with the demon, and having a child together.
Yeah.
That was the main part of the storytelling.
Yeah. In reality, you know, we sometimes call these beings as demons. And in reality, that's just a poor translation, you know, that the word, I mean, in the Hindu word is Rakshasa.
Yes,
so they were not all bad, you know, they were just beings with special abilities, you know.
Yes.
So in reality, you know, we are, so I know the story that you talk about. It's Bhima, the second brother who marries Hidamba and creates a son.
Yes. Yes. So it was more about this creating the son and the marriage of these two. Yes. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Okay, if nobody else asks, how can I figure out or how can I figure out stories which I might tell, and stories I might not tell, so that I have to have really deep knowledge of the story, of the philosophy. Already this little part showed me there is much more than meets the eye. When I've read this story, the storyteller gave me a translation from English. It was very small, this part. And when I read it, for me, it had nothing to do with religion. And that's maybe the case because the names were translated, but I don't understand. Or the names, the original names were given in Latin letters, but the meaning of the names were not given. So that's already a difficulty that I found. The names, but all the names have meanings. Also here in Europe, normally the names have a meaning, only that we don't know it or we don't use it so much. I think it's very hard, and maybe I keep more distance. Or which would you recommend to go to for asking whether this is okay, or to explain the philosophy of the story a little bit in the deeper? Is there any maybe network of where you?
It becomes difficult because Hinduism is not a very organized religion. I think that's the difficulty with Hinduism. It's not an organized religion, and often people take gurus on. You know, they find a guru because the guru translates and explains the meaning of various texts, etc. Because that's the way the system works. I wouldn't just take a little piece out of the Mahabharata and tell the story if I don't know the Mahabharata itself, because you would want to read the Mahabharata to say what is the context. Otherwise, you're just telling a story. You know, you picked a small piece of the jigsaw and you've said, okay, I'm just going to talk about this jigsaw. If you understood the Mahabharata, then if you sort of remember earlier on, I sort of said that there are different philosophical systems, etc. So in reality, they exist then within the texts. So Bhima, you talked about the brother who marries Hidambi. his father is the wind god. Is the god of wind. And so we also have all the nature gods, right? So you have the rain god, who is Indra. So you have Indra, you have Surya, which is the sun, and you have the wind. And so Bhima is very strong because his father is the wind god, you know. So Bhima himself has supernatural strength and supernatural abilities, etc. So I don't hold it against him that he's married this Hirambi, who people say is demon. She just was different, you know. And the other thing is that the Mahabharata is very different than some of the other Puran. Mahabharata and the Ramayana are considered as they're known as itihas. Itihas in Sanskrit means historical. So it might not have all the things of history because it's got a lot of mythology there, but it is considered that they're historical. So you need to also remember, that means you also need to remember that when the Mahabharata was being told orally, before it was written, it was an oral tradition. Yeah. So when the Mahabharata was being told orally, how much of that culture went into writing that Mahabharata the way it was written? Because remember that it was being told orally, but it is not the Shruti, the one which is heard, which means you absolutely stick to the syllable, the intonation, everything has to be correct. It is Smriti, that which is remembered, and memory has a bias. So I look at it, how much of it is cultural, and what cultural aspects are added to it, you know.
Okay, thank you.
Probably didn't answer your question at all, right? So I would probably say that you know, you can even get very small books. I mean, Mahabharata is again like 18 books, right? The 18 books make up the Mahabharata, right? And you know, the Savitri story I told earlier on, I just roughly said it, that's in the Mahabharata. Okay, so that is the story in the Mahabharata. And some of the stories in the Mahabharata are really good. You know, like the Savitri story is really good. The fact that, you know, so Mahabharata has got these little gems all throughout. And I think another story, when I say the Yudhishthir, we talked about Yudhishthir, the older, the one who knew difference between right and wrong. So when he gives up his kingdom, he walks with his brothers and his wife up towards on Mount Kailash to reach the tip of Kailash. And what he knew was when he came to the top of Kailash, he will be able to enter heaven. While he's walking with his brothers, a dog follows them. And as they climb higher and higher, his wife dies, then one brother dies, then second brother dies. Eventually, Yudhishthir is left alone with the dog. When he comes to the top, and heaven opens and says, Yudhishthir, you deserve it. Please come in. And Yudhishthir says, he looks at the dog and looks at him and he says, only if you allow the dog in as well. And the guard of the heaven says, you can't allow the dog in. Heaven's only open for you. you need to come in. And he said, nah, I'll give it a miss. Because this dog has protected me all throughout the journey. Now I need to protect him. And we have a Sanskrit saying which says, Dharma Rakshati Rakshataha. Because Yudhishthir stands for Dharma. Dharma is righteousness. It says, righteousness protects you if you protect righteousness. Dharma Rakshati Rakshataha. Which is true to an extent in every being, that if we don't protect the value of that which is right and wrong, if we don't, it will only come and bite us. You know, if we go and do this, you know, if we're anti-nature, we're only killing ourselves. So all the natural order of the universe, if you keep on breaking it up, you're only killing yourself at the end of the day. So that's what the meaning does. So there's always a deep meaning into a story.
Okay.
And
thank you so much.
Welcome. Yeah.
Can I ask something, a little one? Where can we find a decent translation of Mahabharata? In English, in French, I don't expect in Greek, but in English or in French.
Okay, I will send details. I will look. I mean, the one I've got now, which is like, but it's a really good translation. I think if you're going to read it, you read a good translation, you know? So I will send the details, and you might be able to order it. Because
I like very much, I narrate Savitri, the tale of Savitri, but I'm not sure if it's the right. I found the story in Greek. Maybe somebody had translated, but I don't know how it was posted on the internet. So I would like a good origin, of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
I will give you the details of the Mahabharata, which I have bought, right?
Ah, you have done such a word. I didn't know.
No, I have bought it. So I know that the translator is a Sanskrit translator, right? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more?
When do you write your book for us?
When do I write your book? I have to write it. I have to write it for my little great nieces and nephews, so that I do think about that. And I just think that, gosh, I should put this, because they're all born and brought up here. They live here. They can't speak another
language,
Britain, another language. So I just think, I'll have to at least put on the philosophy in writing, so that they, you know, and later on, once they read that, they can go higher up, you know. I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, please. And I will buy it immediately and read it.
Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Think Ursula.
Yeah, I'd be really happy, because I tried to put everything down in writing, but I'm not sure about the spelling. So I'd be really happy to have a list of the different books or collections of stories, if you could put that down, because I'm not sure whether I spelled it right. So Momo, maybe you can.
I will. I haven't opened any of the messages. So what I'll do is I'll just basically store them, save them, and then I can look at them, you know. Momo, you can pass if you can read the message to me.
Yes, I can. The message is in the chat.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean the books you were, or the story collections or the collections you were referring to, because
No, I'll send that. I'll send the names.
Okay.
And that means
Thank you.
Momo will pass it on to you, right?
Yeah, thank you, because I probably got it completely wrong in spelling.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I will need that too, because if you said that in the, I'm not just connecting to which books. If you just said that, I have to put it in the subtitles. So I also need some spelling for doing that.
Bernhard?
I have another question. Do you know of any collections of folk tales of India, which might be easier to adapt to or to get the philosophy out of them?
It's very difficult to get philosophy out of them. I tell you the reason why is because if you're looking at the classic animal tales and folk tales, they're written in Sanskrit. And you need to have and even in India, it's a problem. It's who translates it and how much of an expert are they in that language? Because are they going to write the stories the way they have heard someone else tell, or how they actually read it the way it is written? I'm not an expert at any level. My father had a lot of books, right? So I've even found like the Hitopadesh, which is the animal fables, all written in Sanskrit, you know, and often they are written so they're couplets which rhyme and they have a deeper meaning. So when you do buy them, sometimes they are not, the meaning is not there, you know, and hence like Mahabharat, Ramayan, etc. are also the same. So who is the translator and how good are they at translating?
Intervention of the translator.
And in India, there's a lot of criticism of sometimes Western translators. And the criticism is the fact that they are remember that old Sanskrit and new Sanskrit, current Sanskrit and old Sanskrit are different in the sense that the same language, but you lose something as time goes, and if the language is not used all the time. So how do you translate the old Sanskrit? And that's a huge questions which people spend their whole life going through, you know, and hence the Vedas have been so difficult because they are recited in old Sanskrit. And then, of course, with the colonization and, you know, remember that there were universities in India with all these books which were burned to the ground when India was colonized. And I don't mean Western colonizers, you know, Western people came later. You had the Mongols who came in and, you know, the university in Takshila was burned to the ground with all the Buddhist and the Hindu stuff. So we've lost so much, you know, and there are names which are there, which says like Sayana had translated, this was his translation of the Vedas, but there were other people who had translated and we've lost it. We've lost it all, you know? So, but on a spiritual level, we haven't lost it. Because I think that if we look at it, that if we go back to that silk fabric, and say all of us are part of that silk fabric with our own little bumps. And, you know, when it will be ironed out, we'll just be part of that universal love. And that makes me feel good. That means that we haven't really, as long as we have something like that to hold on to, then we haven't lost anything, you know.
Okay.
Maybe beautiful words to come to an end. Or is there any other urgent question? Anya?
It's not urgent, but I am curious about the word shruti. Shruti.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a connection to the shruti box, to the musical instrument? Is it the same word, or does it? No, it's...
Yeah, Shruti means that which is heard. So someone has given the name Shruti to the box when they invented it. So
I see. No.
Shruti box is a newer invention, really. It's not an ancient instrument. And Shruti is that which is heard.
Yes, so the connection is musical, simply
Musical,
musical.
yeah.
And did you come back to play any musical instrument?
I didn't. I was going to India to learn the most basics from. So I follow a spiritual teacher who is a woman, and she's a guru, and she is an artist, and she follows a Bengali spiritual path called the Baul movement, B-A-U-L, Baul, right? So they basically, their worship is just singing and dancing. And she's absolutely amazing, because I've gone to her ashram twice and stayed there, and she dances, you know, it's fantastic, yeah. And I think it's such a nice pathway that you worship God through dance and music. So the stories are told, but by dance and songs.
Yes, it's a connection between the soul and the body, and
yeah. And they have a tradition in Bengal. These and they also have incorporated Sufism into it. So it's all very mixed, and they go from house to house with their musical instrument, and they sing and dance, and they give them some food or whatever. Then they would take it all back to the ashram, and they'd cook it and eat it, and they're happy with that.
Thank you. Ich finde es nicht.
Okay, thank you all. Momo, do you have some words that you want to share?
Yes, of course. I'm very, very grateful for this interview, and that we really had so much insights and deepness and laughter and all of that, what we wanted to share. And thank you, Chandrika, very, very much that you are doing this, and that you shared all your wisdom and all your insights. And I'm very, very happy that you were here. And I also thank Victoria for looking over the chat and being here to give us this space to be together here. And I also have to ask for everybody still listening and watching this video, if you liked it, if you liked the interviews, please help us to make it a long-term reality, because I think it's so valuable that we have these talks and that we find interview partners. And if this should go on after summer 2024, we really need the support of the community. So there is a donation website you can easily find wherever this is published. And yeah, and I want to close and thank everybody in the live audience here that you came here and that you stayed till the end, and for your questions and for your presence of listening, because I think it's also very valuable that we have listening ears in this interview. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandrika.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you, Momo, for asking me.
Yes, thank you for coming.
Okay. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Okay. Bye. Bye-bye.